Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Amplify the Voices of the Global Majority Online Summit, focusing on how we heal. I'm your host, Reggie Hubbard, and today we welcome Lama Owens for an intimate and candid conversation about healing and liberation. What a time to be alive, y'all. And I say that in all the ways. I say that in terms of just like, woo child, like what is going on? I say that also in terms of what a chance we have to come together and have honest conversations in service to our collective healing and liberation. I think that there's never been a better time for different voices to come together, for different practices and people to come together of like heart and clear mind to offer conversations and practices of service to our collective healing and liberation. Kripalu has joined forces with change makers around the globe who work to dismantle equity and mitigate harm, steward the planet, and prioritize collective wellness and stress interdependent liberation. Throughout history, voices of the global majority, Black, Indigenous, and people of color, have been at the forefront of breaking down barriers of systemic issues that affect both the planet and humanity while ushering in radical change, whether that has been bringing yoga to the West or fighting injustice on the front lines of society. And now is a time that requires us to listen, heal historical wounds, and to do something different. Because this playbook ain't working. Okay. We enter into this work as an act of community, and community care, because none of us can be well until all of us are well. So again, welcome. We're inspired and blessed to be sharing this space and experience with you. And this online summit creates a compassionate space to humanize the healing process, to explore justice as a tool for restoration, and to cultivate the humility, determination, and surrender that is essential to the path of transformation. Our world is navigating multiple crises of grief, interpersonal, including personal and collective loss, climate disruptions, post-pandemic recovery, online global political conflicts, political strife, global strife. It seems ubiquitous. And this event invites participants to gently hold these realities while exploring pathways to healing. Together, we'll lean into the wisdom of ancestral practices, the solace of community, and the hope inherent in renewal. And it's also springtime, the season of hope and renewal. So we gather today virtually in the hills of the Berkshire Mountains on the ancestral territory of the Stockbridge-Munsee Band of Mohicans. I'm calling in from the unceded territory of the Piscataway Indians in Anne Arundel County, Maryland. And Kripalu stewards these lands as a nonprofit educational organization dedicated to empowering people and communities to realize their full potential through transformative wisdom and the practice of yoga, not just asana, yoga. Our Amplify Voices series has been made possible because of the generous gift of donors, so we give thanks for their generosity to make sure that these events are possible and take place. And as part of this collective space, we would like to center our online community agreements. They have been in emails you received as part of the online summit. And thank you for reviewing the agreements and for being here. So let's take a moment to come together in collective virtual circle. Inhale through the nose gently and deeply. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Exhale with a soft catharsis. Let something go. Now, we are honored to welcome Lama Owens. Lama Rod is an international influencer with a Master of Divinity in Buddhist Studies from Harvard Divinity School with a focus on intersection of social change, identity, and spiritual practice. His teachings center on freedom, self-expression, and radical self-care. Emphasis on radical. He is the author of several books on how we heal and become free. Connection is Lama Rod's second language. Authenticity is first. Honoring Southern roots, he shares his healing approach as laying hands. His laying of hands, however, is guidance. It's showing you how to do the work of making necessary choices in your day-to-day relationships and routines to heal and free yourself from the traumas that bind you to self-sabotaging behaviors. Without further ado, let us welcome Lama Owens.
Thank you, Brother Reggie, for that introduction. Thank you for having me, welcoming me into this sacred space with this dialogue. And welcome to everyone who's watching and tuning in and joining us. May you be blessed as well through this interaction, which for me is just like, it's just, what would I call it? A deep embrace of another, you know, what would I say, brother, but more than brother, like family. You
Right.
know, it's like it's how family speaks with one another, right? It's how we communicate, particularly when we're on the same page, like when we're doing the work together. That communication becomes transformative,
Right.
radical.
Because
Right?
the one thing that happens more often than not, which is why I'm excited to have you, but have so many of the other people in this series, is that whether it be cultural norms or just the labors of the work, we feel like we're doing this by ourselves. So when we break down the silos and compare notes contemporaneously, like that's where the transformation manifests, right? Like so, like you're doing it your way, I'm doing it my way. I remember when we were in Kripalu a few weeks ago, just to be in the space together, just and not say nothing, and then we had a great conversation. But to be in community with you, it was just kind of like I'm not alone.
Exactly.
Right? We're out here like slaying demons and dragons and like summoning this and holding space for that. And you just like, fellow wizard warrior,
Yeah.
ashe, you know, just like ashe. So I'm excited, and I love the way that you created that container for our conversation, because y'all, we're just gonna have a heartfelt conversation, not only on healing, but what it takes to heal in these times that require us to be honest for our collective liberation. So it may be kind of free form and floating, but it'll be derivative of conversations that we've had individually and collectively, and hopefully of merit to those seeking true truth and tactics to uproot systemic oppressive thoughts, which manifest in thought and then system and then behavior. So
Mhm.
I'm just excited to like have this conversation. I guess I want to begin by, you know, I've read all of your stuff, and specifically in the newest work of the new saints, you talk about not everybody is here to be free. So
Mhm.
when we talk about how we heal, we have to remember that not everybody wants to be healed, and that's neither good nor bad. It just is.
No.
So
Yeah.
how do you come to be at peace with that's just what it is? Because that can be disheartening to some people.
You know, and even more so too, there are even people who want to be healed, but they don't want to do the work. Like they want to skip over the work, bypass the work to get to the healing, right?
Yeah.
And then when we show up and we say, no, this is the path, you have to go through the suffering, you have to go through the trauma to get to the healing, right? And then people are like, no, I'm not ready for that. You know, no, people, no, people have literally like left programs or events of mine, right? Saying, you know what, this is too hard, you know, and I'm just like, this is all I have. Like, I don't, like, I don't have like a magic pill to give you. Right?
Right.
That's the culture that we're indoctrinated by. It's like
Right.
this like instant gratification, this instant kind of like, you know, I if I want something, I deserve to get it. It's
Now.
now, right now, right? And we don't understand what real labor is, right?
Right.
Particularly this kind of labor of healing, which feels isolating. Like it's the kind of labor that doesn't look good on social media, right? Like, and I tell people it's like if you do this healing work, you will look messy. And then people will look at you and start talking shit about you. They're like,
Hmm.
oh, I thought so and so was spiritual, but like their shit is like all over the place. And that's healing. And are you ready for that? Right?
Right.
But even getting back to your question, it's so much of what I've had to learn is to be patient.
Okay.
Like you have to wait for people to consent to the work. You can't
Yep.
force anyone to do anything. You can't force anyone to heal. You can't force people to get free, right?
Yeah.
If I do force people, or if we force people
Violence.
to do something, it's violence, right? We call that like, colonization,
Yeah.
right? This is like, we're going to show up and we're going to tell you what's best for
This
you,
way, right.
and there are no
Right.
deviations. You're going to do it exactly like this. And if you don't do it, there are repercussions, there are consequences, right?
Right.
Even as healers, people do that. They're like, you're going to get healed,
Hmm.
right? And that's too aggressive,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
So I had to work through my own deep disappointment, my own brokenheartedness,
Yeah.
and learn how to wait for people to get ready for the medicine because I had to get ready
Yeah. Man.
for the work, right?
Mm.
I had, even coming onto the path, coming into Buddhism and meditation, I was just like hanging out, and my teachers were like, okay, whenever you're ready.
Mm. Right. Right. Right.
Like no one was manipulating me, no one was forcing me.
Yeah.
They're like when you're ready, right?
Yeah.
Because consent is imperative because at the end of the day, when it gets hard and it will get hard, like you can't blame anyone else. You can't say, well, I'm only doing this because so and so made me,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
that's not sustainable.
No.
Oh, like when it gets hard, the most important thing that I take refuge in is the fact that I chose this.
Right.
I chose this because I understand that this is what I need to do. Not because my mama did it, not because my cousin did it, not because my teachers wanted me, because I needed to do this.
Right.
Right? And that's going to deepen a sense of self trust, of self agency. And those are the things that you need to be in this work. Right.
Yeah. I love that. I mean, you and I talked about this in person, but I'll bring it up again. Healing is messy, and that's part of the reason, especially in the context of my stroke recovery, I've been very explicit about this. I've shared just about everything
Yeah.
to humanize what healing truly is. And so, like, in many ways, I don't present like what I've been through because, like, my life ain't the Truman Show. Like, Reggie Hubbard ain't the Truman Show. Like, they just the stuff that I be doing. It ain't. I'm not like, hey, like, I'm too old for that. But in the moments where I'm learning how to walk again, like in the moments where like I'm visibly, like my left side of my face is visibly like lower, diminished playing sound because like sound was giving me the space to process the enormity of what I needed to do to heal. When doctors told me, Mr. Hubbard, they said five things with words that are this long, and like I'm sitting there and can't walk, and I'm just like,
Mhm.
do I have the energy to hide this from people? And you took vows as capital T teacher? You can't. And so to me, it was shown essentially that you need to show the mess.
Yeah.
You need to take off your face and just show people like how you look, how you really look.
And
And go ahead.
no, I just wanted to just uplift like the choices that you made to be very public and very vulnerable about your journey. Because we don't get that. We don't get a lot of that from Black men
Mm,
on the path. And you showed up, and you were like, this is what it looks like, this is how it is, right? And for people like me watching that and witnessing that, it was such potent medicine, right? That vulnerability, because it again, like it showed us that like we're not alone in this, that this happens. And we know it happens, but this happens,
hmm,
right? And you showed us how to bring it on the path, as we say, to make it part of our work, not just as this thing that happened to us that we just have to deal with. You chose to show up to it as a teacher, not, and to allow the healing process itself to become a teacher for you.
yeah.
Doing so, you became a teacher for all of us, right?
I received that, and it's that's another reason like when Kripalu asked me to do this thing, I'm like, yeah, let's talk about all of this. Because of what you said, black man, all these other things, but also no one, I mean, I speak specifically from the context as a stroke survivor here. 750,000 people have this happen to them, and that's just them per year domestically. And then there's the caregiver community, and and that's at least one or two or three, right? So think that's 3 million people per year, minimum, basic statistics, in silence. So you know this as a teacher, like my job is to give voice to what is silent or hidden, like so it can heal, so it can find the space to alchemize and transmute. Like if it's a secret, it ain't healing, but like if it's open, then like certain things can liberate, descend, ascend, all these other things. But like it's not until you turn towards it that you can really do anything with it. And I guess that brings about my second question is that there's so many things happening, in the time of apocalypse unveiling, like all these shrouds are falling down and things are like super real for people. And it can be overwhelming.
Yeah.
So, what guidance or what, in terms of, especially in the context of healing, if there's so much going on, you can't turn towards everything. What do you turn to?
Mhm. I think if we're talking in terms of support, I think first and foremost, we need to call our people in. Like we need our people, we need our communities, right? And this is something that I am seeing from a lot of folks, particularly around me, is that like people are getting serious about who their people are, right?
Hmm.
And this is when you just kind of hold on. And it's a phrase that I have, which is hold on tight but gently,
Right.
and I see people like really defining, who their people are because these are the people that we're going to have to rely on, right? Because you can't rely on everyone, right?
Say
Like,
that again.
oh, because it's just like so many people are not ready to really hold others. Like they
Yeah.
need to hold, right?
Right.
Um, so we call in our people, we get clear about what's happening as
Right.
well. We get clear about like that this is more than just like systemic collapse, right? It's more than just apocalypse, but this is the breaking down is what has to happen for something else to emerge. For
Hmm.
what I call the new world,
Hmm.
right? It's just the new world just doesn't happen because we want it to happen.
Right.
Like the things that have prevented real like justice and real equity and everything, like all these structures, these systems and institutions they have to be abolished, right?
Right.
And we have to hold space for that collapse. And it's going to feel like we're dying, you know? But it is a kind of death because these old identities are dying along with all these old structures and systems, right? And this is why we have to hold tight and gently to one another right now, right? And this is also when I say we have to call in the earth, we have
Hmm.
to roots be tethered to the earth. You have to be tethered, I would say, in general, to the natural world, right? There's this potent medicine that we've been so disenfranchised from.
Yeah.
And this is why I call this period a period of re-indigeneity.
Yeah.
Like there's an invitation to return back to the land, to the natural world, to the unseen world, to be in a deeper collaboration and relationship, right? It's about remembering like who our ancestors were, even our far ancestors, right? We have to
Yeah.
remember that we all come from people who were in deep relationship to the land, not in deep relationship to systems and institutions that mitigated,
Yeah.
and
Right.
managed
Right.
our relationship, right? We need to return back to direct relationship, right?
Yeah.
And then even more so, like we have to start letting go,
Yeah.
like we have to figure out what needs to be offered back. I don't use the word sacrifice or given up, but like offered back, like that's more gentle for me. Let's figure
Yeah.
out what needs to be offered and surrendered back, right? And then I think lastly, too, we need to enter into a real kind of collective grieving.
Hmm.
Like I often say that's the real frontier
Okay.
for us is collective grief. Because that's how, for me in my practice, that's how we actually release the trauma, the disappointment, the brokenheartedness is through grief, through grieving, through holding each other through this, right? We have to let go of all these centuries, these past centuries of violence and war and
Yeah.
genocide. We have to tell the truth about what's happened. We have to feel that brokenheartedness, that sadness, right? And then we have to just give it lots of space and let the whole process change us,
Yeah.
right? Let's become something new, right? A new iteration, a new expression that is not dependent on these old ways of being, which are just iterations of violence and domination and oppression. Let's go of that. Let's let go of that. Let's grieve that. And let's open to a newer identity that's really centered on real care and freedom.
I love that you articulated that grief, a collective grief, is the new frontier. So, grief, we have at least two sessions about grief in the How We Heal series because not only in my personal life, but in my personal healing, like when I couldn't walk again, I had to mourn the fact that that may never happen. Like I may be this way, and I know and I love that you said not sacrifice or offer back. I mean, because especially in the context of my most recent healing miracle, I had to let go of how I eat.
Mm,
I
right.
had to let go of the guilt of the bad decisions I was making. So like when you have like a major event happen to you physically, yeah, there are genetic preconditions, but a lot of it is behavior. And so like I had to grieve my part in my situation in order to build from it.
Mhm.
People are like, don't beat yourself up. And I'm like, no, it's not beating myself up. It's like giving the space for these natural feelings which exist to be present with them so that they can fall away so that that was so when all the sharing that I did, the reason I could share is because I had space for the grief. It became words, it became a teaching. It was nebulous, then it got like a little bit more congealed, then it got condensed, then it got expressed. And that collective grief, because one of the things way back in like those pandemic days, right, which never happened, right? Like we didn't have like a global reckoning that everyone wants to forget about. But you came on because I was in socially engaged Buddhist training with Roshi Joan Halifax, and you came on one of those webinars or several of them, but one that I remember specifically is that you talked about because as an organizer before I did any of this teaching stuff like capital T teaching, I was a community organizer, and you talked about like when we remember that suffering is something that we all have in common, and the sooner we remember that we have it in common, we can build community around that, and then building community around that allows for it to be seen, expressed, and liberated. I was just like, yes. I was like, I'm gonna meet this guy and I'm gonna tell him that that changed my life. I'm gonna tell him that made me want to study this stuff more. So talk a little bit more about like it's not a bad thing that we have suffering in common. It's the thing that brings us together.
Yeah, it's the thing that brings us together, absolutely. And it is the thing on which real empathy is based. That's the key. It's
Yeah.
not just that we're together because we're suffering. It's like, yeah, we're recognizing and seeing, witnessing each other's deep discomfort
Mm-hmm.
creates this kind of intimacy, right?
Right.
And this is, I often say, I use this word often, which is contextualize, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I say empathy contextualizes people, which means that it's easy for us to just label someone evil.
Yeah.
I have there's one particular person in general, that's I think at the top of a lot of people's list right now as being the incarnation of evil. Um, but like we can look at people like that and say, oh, you're inherently evil. that's actually a kind of emotional violence. It's a level of violence because we rob people, even if they are
Mm-hmm.
of their humanity. But if we
Mm-hmm.
rob someone of their humanity by calling them evil or objectifying them, then we, in a way, rob ourselves of a kind of humanity, that
Right.
humanity of real empathy, of real connectivity, even though it's hard, right? So empathy helps us to say, listen, this person is suffering. That suffering is probably why they do the things that they do.
Yeah.
They weren't suffering so much, I wonder if they would be making different choices,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that's a hard shift for people because we love to hold on to our grudges. We love to hold on, to like all of our labels about people. But at some point, if you're living together, you have to let go. You have to offer up the all of these grievances and to allow people to be hurt. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And as you recognize people's hurt and how they respond to that hurt, maybe weaponizing that hurt, creating harm for others, then we're able to, in a really loving way, create structures, of accountability,
Mm-hmm.
not punishment, but
Mm-hmm.
how do we support people in understanding the harm that they're creating, even though they may be in a lot of suffering themselves?
Right.
That's when community evolves.
Mm-hmm.
When we're able to call in the people we feel are creating the most harm and say, listen, what can we do to help you? Because you're out of control right now. You know? And
Right.
and to let go of this label of calling people evil, because that's just the easy way out of being in
Right.
relationships with people. If someone's evil, then we're like, oh, they can't be helped. They're
Right.
just inherently evil. That's real easy,
Right.
right? Community isn't easy,
Right.
right? So letting go and saying, people who do harmful things are in a lot of suffering. Let's tend to that. What's our
Right.
response?
Right.
You
You
know?
talked about just now holding on to grudges, which is, I mean, I'm a Libra, so we're balanced. um, and I tell people that it's not that I hold on to grudges, I just don't forget, and
Right.
which is, semantics. But, especially in the context of how we heal and collective liberation, and this is something I've learned as well, not just with the stroke, but even with racialized trauma that I've been carrying. Walk us through how one might unidentify with trauma. You know what I mean? Because a lot of us, and I mean this with love, be carrying our traumas around like fur stoles.
Yeah.
And look at this. You know what I mean?
Like
When
trophies.
that's
Yeah.
only part of it.
Yeah.
Like the healing comes from, yeah, I've been identifying with this, but
Yeah. Yeah. Because, that trauma becomes just another identity location for us.
mm-hmm,
And we begin to self-identify with it, and there's no more space. It's
right,
like we are the trauma.
right,
And then, of course, what happens is we build community around that self-identification with trauma.
mm-hmm,
Right? And so when you have a community that's really deep in trauma like that, it's no longer a liberatory community.
mm-hmm,
You know, um, and so when I think about trauma, I think first and foremost, it's like I have to start understanding trauma as an experience,
mm-hmm,
not as what I am, but as something that is moving through me. It's an experience that's arising, right? I
right,
am separate. This sense of I has to be separate from this experience of trauma.
mm-hmm,
Right? And when I'm able to do that, then I'm able to give this experience of trauma lots of space, right? And I believe, in my practice and in my language, suffering is asking to be tended to,
yeah,
right? So when I feel trauma, like in my experience, I know, okay, this experience is asking for care. And how do I give it care? Well, I'm going to give it lots of space to be there,
mm-hmm,
right? I'm going to disidentify, right? Not
mm-hmm.
only that, I'm going to ask this experience what it needs,
Yeah.
right? And I'm
You talk
going,
about that so beautifully in the book on rage.
yeah, yeah, that tenderness, You know, it's like too often we're going in with an agenda. Like we're gonna get this done, we're gonna do this healing. That's too aggressive.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like we have to return back to this kind of tenderness, this gentleness, right? Because that is the etiquette trauma is asking from us. It's
Mm-hmm.
the tenderness, it's the gentleness, it's the spaciousness, it's the fluidity, right? And it's like, okay, what do you need? It's like talking to like your beloved, baby, what do you need?
Mm-hmm.
You know, like because what's happening now is not working out. You know, right? And
Mm-hmm.
then you call in, like, and you know, you have to call in your resources. Like prayer is a
Uh,
big part of everything that I do, right? You know, so when in doubt, I pray.
mm-hmm.
What do I need to tend to this trauma? What does my trauma need? Like, how do I create the space for this, right? How do I help trauma to be fluid itself? Like, what are the modalities and the practices where I can start moving and shifting some of this energy around? Because this is what trauma is asking me. It's asking for movement,
Right.
for flow, right? And how do I relax around this experience?
Right.
You know, how do I just surrender and open, right? And let trauma have its space. That kind of mentality, I mean, it can not just apply to suffering, but to everything. A really gentle, open approach to everything, instead
Right.
of rigid, contracted kind of responses or reactivities that we have to things.
I love that you just said, because I had never heard that before. Like the etiquette that trauma is requesting is tenderness and gentleness.
Yeah,
So to think of etiquette to me brings to mind um, a level of sacredness,
yeah, absolutely.
right?
Exactly.
Right. So if trauma has an etiquette to which it requests, then that elevates it from just regular normal experience, right? So I love the phrasing of etiquette.
Mhm. It's really the case, right, that our trauma is in many ways very sacred. And what would happen if we took on that mindset, that this experience is actually divine, that is sacred,
Right.
instead of just an annoyance or like just something we have to deal with, right? Like this is sacred. What would that mean?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because the liberation is in the trauma. It's not around it, it's not over it, it's not on the other side. The liberation is through.
Right.
And of course people will think, well, what does that mean? Well, it means that the nature of trauma is already liberated,
Right.
right? And one of the things that has to be liberated is my misunderstanding of the phenomena itself,
Right.
right? What is trauma? Like what is trauma outside of the labels that we
Right.
put on it, right? It's like what is trauma really? And this is what we're trying to see, which is really, the heart of so much that we've brought up is that like we have to start gazing upon or relating to phenomena in a way that's not so negative, I guess.
Right.
Like we have to begin to relate to the liberated nature of all phenomena, be it something joyful and be it something painful. Everything has
The
the same nature.
one of the many things that I enjoy spiritually about like consistent dharmic practice for me is the cultivated capacity to hold joy and sorrow with reverence.
Yes.
Right? So not just the joys,
Mhm.
because my computer is out of control, but not just the joys, but the sorrows, right? I mean, there's something I can do for sorrows as well, but like the I forgot about those things, but to cultivate capacity for the joys and the sorrows gives life such richness, like gives for me anyway, my experience with it is that Someone came up to me at a train station recently, and walking is a relatively new phenomenon for me. I've had to learn how to walk again over the past 6 months. So sometimes I'm like, I'm gonna take the ramp, but this day I was gonna take the stairs. Like spirit was like, take the stairs, and I'm like, all right. So I walk up the stairs, bump smack dab into a high school classmate who's just told his wife the night before that he wanted to have a divorce.
Oh, good.
And Lama Rod, the look on brother's face
Mhm.
was so like vexed and tight. And he's like, Reggie, what am I gonna do? I don't feel I can talk to anybody. And I was like, good news is for you that I'm very well acquainted with heartbreak and I love to talk about it. So tell me all about your heartbreak. Your heartbreak is welcome here. And he was like, I'm like, what you got? Had I not been consistently turning towards the things I'd rather not deal with kindness, with gentleness, with curiosity, with those sorts of things, why in the world would I love heartbreak? Why? How could that naturally just slide off the tongue?
Yeah.
You know. So I think in the context of how we heal and me turning towards these things has not only given me liberation, but it helped that brother experience a moment of freedom that he didn't know he would have because prior to me walking up the stairs and bumping into him, he was like tight.
Yeah.
Didn't see anything. So my turning towards the sorrows, cultivating appreciation for them, gave me the space to give him space so he could get space, which is the act of healing and community and liberation.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. And that's, I think when with people listening to this, right? I think sometimes there are questions around why do we have to deal with the suffering? Like, it's why are we always talking about suffering? And I think what's important for us to understand, even beyond everything that we've lifted up, is that we have to, at some point, really examine how much energy we spend pushing suffering away and bypassing it. Like
Hmm.
that's like if we can start paying attention to that, right? We, all of us realize that like we are exhausted pushing everything away, bypassing everything, manipulating everything to stay comfortable, right? And it becomes really overwhelming. And I think this is why so many people are like really overwhelmed right now. It's not the collapse and the violence and the harm that's happening. It's actually like their intense, overwhelming effort to keep things.
Everything's fine. No, it
Yeah,
ain't.
that takes a lot of energy, right? And what we're saying is that if you can actually let go of all of that resistance, that aversion, and then start inviting some of these experiences in, then you can get a closer look at it and really begin to understand that there are solutions, right, to really working through and releasing these experiences of suffering. But you can't get there if you're always pushing it away. And
Right.
that's hard. But
Right.
on the other end, there's this real space and a deeper sense of freedom, right? And that's what we that's where we need to occupy is that space now, after we metabolize and go through the suffering.
Yeah, that that that's not only beyond true. I mean, I think that the thing that stands out most to me about that is we can't avoid it, so why try? And not only that, like I started teaching a practice, especially given all that's happening in the world. It's called "I'm Not Okay, and That's Okay."
Yeah.
uh, Community meditation, and the trick is it's a mindfulness of emotions practice. Like, but like I'm not okay, and that's okay. We did the first one a couple weeks ago, and we had 40 people like out of the blue coming and just expressing how not okay they were and doing it in community
Yep.
and giving themselves the space to gently inquire about. So I was introducing the tools of personifying your grief, like, hey, grief, what's up? Like, how, like, what you got for me, like, so introducing a conversational experience to this thing that you've been avoiding or otherwise offering aversion towards. And people just were like, when is the next one happening?
Mhm.
Because our culture just doesn't offer opportunities to be like, I'm not okay. This sucks, right? Yeah, it sucks. You know what I mean? Whatever it is. And to see people respond to that not only shows the wisdom that we all know and serve, but shows the relative simplicity. I mean, I think of healing as a practice, not a destination.
Yeah.
You know, and the work of liberation and community building is a practice, not a destination, because there's always something else to do, not in a checklist type thing, but there's always an opportunity to refine, explore, show curiosity, keep beginner's mind, all of those sorts of things.
Mhm.
And when we give people a taste of their agency, as you talked about earlier, that's what makes the opportunity to turn towards healing. Because, you know, Dr. Gail Parker talks about this like healing ain't for the weak.
Yes. Yeah.
So to endeavor to even consider what healing might look like takes courage.
Mhm. Mhm.
And my job, our job as teachers, our job as community builders and space holders is to just create the conditions where you offer the gentle inquiry as to what might it look like to heal.
Yes.
And if you ain't got the answers, you're in community. So maybe a conversation, and you don't even need to offer anything, but you can hear someone sharing from their experience. You know, that's the goal of this experience is you and I are having a loving conversation, and maybe it'll just spark like opportunities for people to find not only nuggets for expression, but tactics. So I guess one of my final questions would be, what are the steps one must take to to turn towards aversion, turn from aversion towards viewing the amount of energy that you waste on avoiding what you'd rather avoid?
Mhm. I think one of the things that's been powerful for me is beginning to think about or reflect on or even dream about who I could be on the other side.
Oh wow,
I like to start with
I
dreams,
love that.
start with the golden scenario, right?
Mm.
You know,
For sure.
like who could I be? What could I do if it wasn't for this experience?
To
That,
awaken the imagination and not have it be a chore.
yeah, like I think
Yeah,
in this moment, like we have to return back to this kind of generative liberatory imagination,
dig it.
right? Because our imaginations are so colonized
Yep,
right now. And for those of us who, yeah, we come from communities that have been systemically oppressed and marginalized, you know, for centuries, right? And again,
right.
to this day, our imaginations feel really occupied
Mm-hmm.
by the imagination of dominant communities,
Mm-hmm.
right? And as artists, you know, like one of our roles, our work in the world is to dream, to imagine beyond,
There you go.
right? And even as teachers too, it's we have to, as you already lifted up, like we have to embody what this healing looks like. Because baby, don't tell me what shit is. Show me what it
Show
is.
me, mama. Right.
But like you don't have to say a word, 'cause I can see it, I can feel it, I can into it. You know,
Right,
like
right, right.
I can all these I can feel what healing looks like. I can feel when people are doing work. I can feel when people are just talking shit about the work. You know, listen, like I can talk shit about the work and do the work at the same time, right? Know,
For sure.
but like that's for me, that's the first piece of advice. It's like start dreaming. Like, who could you be beyond this? Right? And then that's going to start shifting things.
Yeah.
You know, like you start buying into it. You're like, okay, I can do that. Okay. And then it's okay. And then what are the other things then that I need to start doing then to get to this dream? And those things start becoming really clear.
Right.
right? You know, like the modalities, the practices, the therapies, the people around you who have been waiting for you to say yes to consent, right?
Yep.
I tell you, this is like incredibly true. When you say yes, when you say fuck it, I'm ready.
Yeah, for sure.
Like, the red carpet will roll out because that's our true natures calling us back.
Okay.
You know, like when you say yes, everything starts to appear, all the resources, all the modalities,
Soul retrieval, for sure.
you start getting curious,
hmm
and now with the internet, you just jump on the internet, you know, and I'm at that age now when I'm like, oh, the internet, because in my early days, we didn't have no internet.
No, yeah.
It
Yup.
was like I think younger people coming up, they're just like, oh, this has always been a thing. It's like, no, mm-mm. You
Book
know,
reports with the Encyclopedia Britannica.
you have the internet now. You have this tool that that holds everything, a lot of information. So when you say yes, you just go to that search bar and say, okay. And it sounds so easy, but you
Right.
have to you have to you have to consent to it in order to have the courage to search,
Right.
how do I heal,
Right.
right? So everything is present for us. We have to say yes, and we have
Right.
to believe that we can experience healing.
Right. So start dreaming, say yes, and what else?
Do your internet search. Um,
Yeah. Love it.
um, yeah, and then find your way into relationship with people who are doing the work.
There you go.
Your work has to be reflected back to you, right? Because when you start healing, it's going to create tension in relationships with folks who aren't making the same choice,
Ain't it though?
and that's going to be deeply disappointing. Right? This is personal experience. When I
Absolutely.
started getting free, it was like, what are you doing? Right? And more so, it's like, well, Black people don't do that. When I was in therapy, people were like, well, Black people don't do therapy. I was like, well, I'm not interested right now in what other Black people are doing.
Absolutely.
There's a way, and I love my people, I love my community, but I was like, I have to divest a little bit from these
Mhm.
cultural attitudes around healing right now because there's medicine waiting for me, and I
You
need
just
to
have to say yes to.
I have to say yes to. I am a, a deep proponent of therapy, and if we have access to those resources, please take them, you know. So community, people, mentors, people who are reflecting this work back to us, it is imperative, right? Find your way into places and communities, support groups, what have you, where people are supporting one another in doing this, right? Um, and to choose more gratitude, to choose more joy, right? Because the work is hard and joy is what balances the work.
Right.
Of course, for me, gratitude is what I awaken to get into joy, but like deep gratitude because I'm not doing this work or we don't do this work just for ourselves. We do it for our communities. We do it for our collectives. We
Right.
do it for our ancestors and we
Yep.
do it for our descendants.
Right.
That's a big source of joy and gratitude for me that this isn't just about me. Everything that I do to heal and to awaken is work that I am offering back to everyone around me. Because when I do my work, I become less work for others. Like
Mm-hmm.
that's important. That's an important kind of ethic and teaching that I live by.
Right.
You know, the more I'm able to do my own emotional labor, the more I am demanding others do this labor for me, right?
Sure.
And not that like we're becoming completely isolated and independent because we still rely on each other for support and labor, but like I want to be in much more awareness around the ways in which I may be forcing people who love me into doing labor for me that I may be really unaware of, right? And that's an act of care,
Right.
as well. So I mean, those are some of my basic things
Okay.
there, right? And when you find your modalities, when you find your practices, you stick with them, you work them.
Yeah.
Don't just like try it for 5 minutes and then be like, oh,
Mhm.
this
Oh,
doesn't work.
whatever. Right.
Again, this is like instant gratification culture, right? It's just like, no, we have to work these practices. We have to work these modalities for a long time for the real fruition to reveal itself. And I just want to encourage people just to invest in that. You know,
Right.
when I came onto the path, I threw everything into the path, all of my resources, time, money, energy, right? Because I knew that the more I put in, the more I would get out. It's
Hmm.
like an investment because it's really
Right.
an investment. The more I put in, the more I get out, right? So if you really want to do it, go all in,
I love
right?
that, to think of healing as, I love that you said, when I do my work, I become less work for other people. My girlfriend, my dear Alexis, she thanked me recently. She was like, thank you for taking your healing thank you for taking your recovery so seriously. And I told her, I was just like, like, I have to take it seriously, not just for me, but like, what kind of person would I be if I didn't take it seriously and put on y'all? Like, that's not cool. That's not cool. You know
Huh?
what I mean? And me, to the second point is, I knew that even when I didn't want to, because trust me, there's some mornings I did not want to wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning to learn how to walk. I'm 50 to just like, let me just get this cane and make it work. No, but like I got up because I thought of it as an investment. But my teacher was asking me to wake up at 7 o'clock in the morning to invest in my own stability, physical stability. But to manifest that physical stability, it required emotional stability, right? So the saying, like becoming, not being work for someone else, but also recognizing the investment that my investment in my healing, the return is not only me, but we.
Yes.
Oh man,
Yeah.
like that kind of blew it open for me.
Yeah. You had agency. You're like, no, I need to do this. I can't wait on others. This is about me, right? And that's something that, again, as we were saying at the very beginning of our talk, right? It's like this agency. Like you have to have agency. You have to choose the healing, and you have to take refuge in that choice, right?
Hmm.
That's going to deepen self-confidence and self-care. It's going to deepen a lot of this.
Grit, resilience.
Yeah. And you're going to discover parts of who you are that you didn't even know existed.
Nope. Right.
And that means, I think a big part of the struggle here is that means that you're going to start having to let go of this old version of yourself that we've gotten maybe very comfortable in,
Yeah.
right? And then transcend or evolve out of that, right? And that's a lot of offering. Right.
Offering back, right?
Because, I think a big thing for me is that, like, lastly, I just think that we realize that people have become quite dependent on these very hurt versions of ourselves.
Right.
When we start letting go of those identity locations, it will create some tension.
Right.
But if people really love us and want us to be free, they will see what we're doing and roll with it and say, I see you trying to get free. As you're changing, I know I'm going to have to change.
Right.
Because I have to start relating to you as a different expression now, not just this traumatized expression you were, but as a more liberated, fluid person, right? And that's going to force me to do work.
Well, I want to thank you, Lama Rod, for this beautiful conversation, and thank you for your generosity of wisdom. And I just a special thank you to the donors supporting this year of Amplify, the Voices of the Global Majority. And thank you all for being with us here online. I'd love for you to close us out with a practice that kind of ties this together, but one of the things of this experience is just offering different ways of relating to how we heal. So the floor is yours. The wisdom, please share with us. And all love and gratitude, dear one.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, brother. All right. So as we move into our practice, and as we were just talking about, I want to approach everything with a level of generosity, a level of tenderness. So I want to introduce you and guide you into just a very short, basic meditation practice, but to do so beginning with this attitude of gentleness. Right? So as we begin, I invite you to allow your bodies to be positioned in any way, any form that feels appropriate or even comfortable for you. Right? So allowing your bodies to arrive, allowing your bodies to be in any form, in any position that your body needs to be in. So not just holding a rigid form because that's what you've been taught, but instead privileging the needs of your body in this moment. So if you need to lie down, if you need to stand up, if you need to be in movement, make those adjustments because that is a loving, caring response to our bodies. Right? So just taking a few seconds to adjust. Right? Sometimes I just ask my body, I just plant this question into my body of saying, okay, what do you need? How can I support you? And as you're getting settled or arriving, I invite you just to kind of notice the kind of rigid container or boundaries that we reinforce to hold our bodies kind of together, right? And what I mean specifically here is just noticing all the ways in which we feel as if we're kind of like shrinking, right? And not taking up space. And I wonder if you can take a few seconds to imagine the boundaries of your body expanding to take up the space around you, the space on your seat, the space wherever you're lying, and so forth. Relaxing that kind of rigid energy, right, um, around our body and just opening that, relaxing, settling. For some of us, this may even translate into doing a short body scan, right? Where we're paying attention, noticing tightness in our bodies, and then gently relaxing, releasing that energy. And this kind of practice is really important because so many of us move through the world really rigid and contained, right? And it just becomes very normalized to feel that rigidity, that containment. And so what we're trying to do is just release some of that. So we feel that our physical bodies as well as our energetic bodies have a little more space, right? Because space is the key to our healing work, the spaciousness, the fluidity, right? Just noticing that. So when you're ready, I invite you to shift your attention now to begin to notice the weight of your body, right? The weight, the density of your body, and how the seat under you is rising to support you. And it could be the seat if you're standing up, it can be the floor, right? Whatever's supporting your body, feeling that surface rise to hold you. And because our healing work, right, is really deeply rooted in trust, right? And for many of us, trust is really difficult to experience. So in this moment, I wonder if you can trust the seat or the surface under you to hold you. Can you allow yourself to surrender, right? And if you're working with your breath, and it's okay if you're not, but if you're working with your breath, just noticing the inhale through your nose, and as you exhale, imagine that that exhale breath helps us to really surrender even more deeply to the seats, right? So inhaling into the nose, exhaling out of the mouth, and just feeling that settling onto the seats, letting your weight, the weight of your body really come home to the holding of the seat. And again, trusting the seat to hold you, trusting the space around you to hold you as well. And I invite you to go even further as we turn our attention down to the land, the earth that's holding all of us. And as we think about the land, we are touching the land, we're touching the earth. And this is really important to remember, even to greet the lands and the earth that's holding us, because the earth is wanting to support us, it's wanting to tether us. This sense of tethering, this sense of holding, right? Connecting to the earth, even in this way, begins to establish this experience of being held, being tethered, feeling the solidity, feeling the foundation of the earth. Even if it's just a thought, even if it's just our imaginations, we can still connect to the sense of solidity, foundation, support that the earth offers all of us. And spending a few more seconds here, just feeling this grounding, this tethering. When you're ready, I invite you to shift your practice into just a short period of reflection. And in our reflection practice, I invite you to imagine, to dream really of a future version of yourself that is free from the suffering, from the discomfort that maybe you're wrestling with, that you're struggling to be in a relationship right now. Who would you be and how would you be if it wasn't for that suffering being so present and prevalent? What could we do if we were able to heal from the suffering or to manage it and to hold space for it? What could be possible, right, for you? So taking just a minute to reflect, to dream on who we could be and what we could do after we heal from the suffering. Just a few more seconds here. And so when you're ready, I invite you to offer this future version of yourself right back into this unlimited spaciousness of your mind, as if you're offering water back to water, right? Letting that image of your future self dissolve back into the nature of your mind, and coming back to the seat, to the weight of your body, touching the earth once again, taking a few more seconds just to integrate everything that we've awakened and practiced. And when you feel grounded again, I invite you to offer movement, very slow, gentle movement back to your bodies, a few simple stretches, a few deep cleansing breaths as you breathe, inhale through the nose and out of the mouth. Doing this as much as you need to. Coming back into the space, and offer deep gratitude for you and your practice. And I pray that your path to healing is completely clear, that you become the person that you most deeply need to become. May you be well.